Drama in Qatar as Max Verstappen loses a stunning pole position due to receiving a shock one-place grid penalty. The outcome, well, it means George Russell will start from pole for the second race in a row, with McLaren locking out the second row just hours after claiming a, well, bizarre 1-2 in the Qatar sprint race. We'll explain why it was bizarre in a few minutes. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks at what is, let me just check the time quickly, 10-2 local time in Qatar. And Ian, the reason why we're recording this at such a late or early hour for you is because we've been waiting for a verdict from the stewards for several hours surrounding Max Verstappen after what was a shock performance by Max and Red Bull, given that they were, well, nowhere in the sprint. P8 for Max in the sprint, finishing behind Nico Hülkenberg. They turned it around for qualifying, only for Max to receive this one-place grid penalty, dropping him to second for, well, in my eyes, a really bizarre situation.
I was going to say, yeah, you used the word bizarre for the McLaren 1-2 in the sprint. I think the most bizarre thing of the day is that penalty. Quite extraordinary. I cannot recall in all my time covering Formula One a one-place grid penalty. Just okay, let's go through the circumstances. Qualifying, George coming up really quick behind a very slow Max, and it was close. Close enough to warrant the stewards looking at it, but more for the fact that Max was driving unnecessarily slowly, in the words of the stewards, Doc. And we've seen those before, that nothing really happens. The driver gets a bit of a slap on the wrist, a bit of a reprimand. But on this occasion, the stewards have decided, as you say, to give Max this one-place penalty. They felt, under normal circumstances, that it's something that might warrant a three-place grid penalty. But on this occasion, their reasoning was the fact that neither driver was on a push lap. The circumstances behind it was that Max was driving unnecessarily slowly. He'd already allowed two other cars to get ahead of him so he could create a reasonable gap to start his next push lap. However, in doing that, he'd left himself on the racing line. The stewards additionally noted that in the short straight leading up to the bend on which he was on the racing line, he was constantly checking in his mirrors, and he would have noticed George Russell coming up quickly behind him. So what they've determined is that because he was driving unnecessarily slowly, because he was driving on the racing line, as I say, that would ordinarily warrant a three-place penalty. But they've argued themselves into now going with this one place because neither driver was on the push lap. So make of that what you will, folks. It means that Max officially has a pole position for the record books. He wins the Pirelli Award for this season for the most pole positions in this season, but he will not officially start on pole position for the race. He will now be second on the grid behind George Russell. As you say, on a day of bizarre events, that one has just really put the cherry on the cake.
And I mean, in my eyes, it was a wrong penalty. I don't really get it. It felt very 50-50 for me. Yes, Max was going unnecessarily slow, but at the same time, George could see exactly where Max was. Just a bizarre incident in general. But actually, let's focus on Max, because obviously he starts from P2 on the dirty side of the grid. But actually, I think ahead of qualifying, none of us would have predicted a Red Bull on the front row, because they were nowhere in the sprint race. I mean, Max finished, as I mentioned, P8 behind Nico Hülkenberg. Checo was, well, last, but more on him later on, as you'd expect. But I mean, and of course, they can make changes to the cars between the sprint race and qualifying. And I mean, Red Bull have worked what seems to be an absolute wonder with the RB20, because, I mean, Max starting second alone is some achievement, and he's right in there for the race win.
Well, you got to think that what they did with Checo for the sprint as well was effectively use him as a bit of a guinea pig to test things. They decided to take a penalty because he was due to start 16th on the grid following sprint qualifying. they imposed some suspension changes. And obviously, when you do that at a part from A, that naturally leads to the starting from the pit lane grid penalty, which was applied to Checo. So, as I say, they imposed some setup changes on Checo's car in a bid to try and get a read on what they might be able to do in Parc Fermé, sorry, out of Parc Fermé,
Yeah.
in between the sprint race and the official Grand Prix qualifying session. So it worked wonders because not only did it get Checo into Q3 for only the second time in the last 9 qualifying sessions, but it actually got Max Verstappen the pole position that effectively isn't pole position for tomorrow's Grand Prix. As you say, Nick, Red Bull working absolute wonders on both cars effectively.
Yeah.
And it's really put Max, you would have thought, in a very good position to challenge for that latest Grand Prix victory ahead of going into tomorrow's Qatar Grand Prix. He's got George on now in front of him. He's got both McLarens behind him. So that's going to be a very interesting tussle indeed. Certainly, hopefully, it's going to be a lot more interesting than the actual sprint race that we saw because, as you say, a little unusual.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of DRS trains. Let's mention Sergio Perez quickly.
Yeah.
Let's mention the whole Checo incident quickly from the sprint, as you mentioned, why he actually started from the pit lane. And actually, it was an incident when the sprint got underway. We're obviously at the end of the pit lane. The guys who start in the pit lane go once everybody else has gone past. And weirdly, Checo, the light went green at the end of the pit lane. 2 seconds went by. He looked around, didn't go, and then pulled away. I think we've seen him pull away out. I think we've seen him pull out the garage faster, to put it simply. Franco Colapinto. Franco Colapinto, who also started in the pit lane due to setup changes by Williams, actually overtook Checo, seemingly in shock of what was going on. Christian Horner was speaking to Sky Sports F1 after the sprint and kind of, I guess in a joking way, kind of said to Ted Kravitz that, well, when the lights go green, you're supposed to go. I mean, it was, fair play to Checo getting to Q3 in quali, but that incident in the sprint at the start was just, I think the word bizarre is going to be used about 50 times in this episode. I was just about
to use the same thing yet again, because in the bizarre list of excuses that Checo Perez has come out with this season for why he's not performed ever since the Miami Grand Prix, this one probably is right up there because I asked him a question directly in the driver's pen after qualifying. I don't know, at least fair play. He qualified in the top 10. Hurrah, well done, Checo. You've done something right there in the past few months. And he turned around and said, well, I was trying to create a gap. Hold on, you're starting from the pit lane when the last car has already gone. You've already got that gap. So you're honestly telling us that you decided to wait even longer to create a gap just because you wanted more clean air, as he put it. Again, on a day of bizarre, I don't think I've ever heard a driver come out by saying, oh, yeah, I decided not to go when the light was green just because I wanted a bit more clean air in front of me. Now, I appreciate they were doing they had made those setup changes on the car and they were doing a bit of experimentation. And I can understand that, yes, clean air was important to try and understand those setup changes. But in all honesty, Checo, that one really takes the biscuit, mate. What's next?
Now, quite clearly, Ian does have a slightly different background. Now, thanks to the wonderful editors of Racing News 365, yours and Joris, they've performed wonders because we've had a bit of a technical difficulty, but all good. We're okay. Ian's okay. We are still recording the early hours of the Qatar morning. So, Ian, I won't take too much of your time. Let's move on swiftly to McLaren and keeping the theme of it being a bizarre Saturday in Qatar because Lando Norris secured third on the grid for the race. Oscar Piastri starts alongside him in fourth. McLaren claimed a crucial 1-2 in the sprint. However, it ended under, well, we'll use the word again, bizarre circumstances.
Becoming the word of this video, isn't it? And hello and welcome to my hotel room, everybody. A bit of a slightly different background, as you can see. Unfortunately, that's due to the wonders of modern technology, and my data package ran out. Tried to upload a new one whilst I was in the vicinity that you saw in the first half of this video, and unfortunately, it just wouldn't work. So I've had to drive all the way back to my hotel. I'm on the hotel Wi-Fi, and here we are with Nick again. So here I am with Nick again. So Yes, it's now just got 3 o'clock in the morning. So this is wonderful. Yeah, as you're saying it, it was bizarre once again. And I'm going to take the phrase of McLaren team principal Andrea Stella, who said that Lando Norris, he drove to perfection. And basically, Lando was on pole in the sprint race. He got off the line cleanly, led it beautifully. His teammate Oscar Piastri, who had started third, got past George Russell out of the opening turn one. And from then on, it just became a battle of maintaining the DRS because George Russell quite clearly had the pace on Oscar Piastri to get past him. However, what Lando was doing was he was allowing Oscar to stay within that second
Yeah.
of him, which allowed Oscar to open his DRS. That allowed him the extra pace down the main straight into turn one, which was pretty much the only
Yeah.
overtaking spot around the circuit. That meant he was able to keep George Russell at bay. And then, just as it looked like it was going to be a straightforward, lights to flag, Lando Norris sprint race victory, within the last 100 meters, as you pointed out, he decided to rein it back in a little bit and just do enough to allow Oscar to claim the sprint victory as payback for the previous sprint race in Brazil, where, of course, Oscar was on course for victory. But, of course, he played the team game, allowed Lando to take the sprint victory on that particular occasion to gain that extra point in the battle with Max Verstappen for the driver's title, which of course ultimately proved in vain because Max produced a drive for the ages in the wet around Interlagos on that particular Sunday. And yeah, that pretty much ended the title battle for what it was worth at that particular stage. So payback, as I say, Lando deciding to just hold back it. And there's a little bit of consternation because for a moment it looked like Russell might just sneak ahead of Lando as well. But when you looked at the overhead camera shot rather than the foreshortened camera angle as we saw initially when the move happened, Lando letting Oscar past, it was pretty clear that Lando had it all under control and there was no way George was going to get P2. So perfection, as I say, was the word used by Andrea Stella, and the ultimate payback in many respects, even though we've now seen two sprint races where neither Oscar nor Lando has looked particularly happy with the situation because effectively they know they've given up a win, and of course the other has inherited a victory which they've not been, as I say, particularly happy about. But it is the way it is. Slate wiped clean. We can now move forward.
And of course, the crucial thing with McLaren claiming the 1-2 in the sprint and Ferrari finishing fourth and fifth is it means McLaren go into the race on Sunday with now a 30-point lead over the Italian team. And to make it simple for our audience, if McLaren win the Qatar Grand Prix, they only need a 44-point advantage over Ferrari. If McLaren do not win the Qatar Grand Prix, they need a 45-point advantage over Ferrari. So effectively, they need to score either 14 or 15 points more than Ferrari in the Qatar Grand Prix, 15 to make life completely easy for all of us. And, you know, with McLaren starting in third and fourth, Ferrari fifth and seventh, it does seem that, yes, of course, George Russell on pole and Max Verstappen in second could be a bit of a nuisance for McLaren and create a few issues, but it is very much still similar to Friday's update. It's advantage McLaren. It is, you know, not one hand on the title perhaps is maybe a bit extreme, but it does feel like that because Ferrari have pace, but it seems just can't quite unlock it all.
No, it's a fair assessment. It's not extreme at all, Nick. They do effectively have one hand on the title. Everything is in their hands. If the four drivers finished in those respective grid spots, and of course we can't expect that to naturally happen, but if that did take place, of course, then it would spill over
Yeah,
into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I think there'd be about a 4 or 5 point
yeah.
cushion extra. So it would be, quite comfortable for McLaren then going into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. It would take an almighty catastrophe for for them to lose the title from that particular position. But we've got to, I'm going to use the phrase that I always say that the drivers say, a long race ahead of us. It's
Yeah.
never a long race. It's still over 300 kilometers. Pretty much apart from the Monaco Grand Prix, every race is just over 300 kilometers. So it's, I always laugh when the drivers say, oh yeah, it's a long race. Well, yeah, I get it in some circumstances, particularly when the conditions, when it's
Yeah.
extreme or extreme wet, then of course, yes, that does make it seem like a particularly long race. But nevertheless, McLaren in full control, you would assume, of the situation. As you say, they got that 30-point cushion. They've got grid advantage tomorrow, or should I say today,
For
as
you, yeah.
we're recording this right now, and as viewers are going to see it.
Yeah.
With, I mean, you've still got to get a night's sleep, of course. The Sunday, it's basically McLaren's to lose from this position.
And of course, we've got to mention quickly our pole sitter, George Russell, who actually has had brilliant pace throughout the weekend in Qatar. Of course, claimed third, as you mentioned, in the sprint race, will now start on pole for the main race following Verstappen's penalty. And actually, if Russell can manage the first lap and end the first lap still in the lead, actually, this is a bit of an early bold prediction. I fancy him to probably win in Losail because he just seems to be at one at the moment with the W15, unlike his 7-time world champion teammate who seems to, well, be looking forward to getting out of that team as soon as possible.
Oh, yeah, just on George was pretty miffed with McLaren's tactics, to be
Yeah,
fair, in that race. He was not a happy bunny at all. But do you know what? They played the team game. They maximised the points from that particular race. And for me, they played it right. George might bemoan all he wants, but unfortunately, when we're at this stage of the season, there's a title on the line. You have to do what you can to get the maximum number of points. And McLaren, to use that word again by Andrea Stella, played it perfectly. So, but as you say, George really has looked on it. And I do agree with his assessment that if he'd managed to have got past Oscar in the sprint race, then I'm pretty convinced he would have gone on to have challenged Lando for that sprint race victory. As you say, he's now inherited pole because of this one place grid penalty from Max. And it does look as if he has been the driver on it all weekend so far, with the exception of sprint qualifying,
yeah,
where Lando was absolutely superb. Perfection from him in sprint qualifying to be quickest in SQ1, SQ2, and ultimately SQ3. But yeah, he has looked the most likely driver on race pace conditions. So it does look as if he has got the edge going into the Grand Prix. But of course, Max Verstappen is a bit of an unknown in
yeah.
terms of his. Yes, he produced good qualifying pace with the changes to the setup on the car. What has he now got on that race pace? Can he challenge George for that victory? Certainly, it looks like going to be a battle between those two. And of course, McLaren, we know, have got good race pace as well. So I think it's going to be a great battle between the four of them tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll get to see a bit more overtaking because, as we saw in the sprint race, the cars were stuck in a DRS train, pretty much created by Lando, of
Yeah.
course. He was backing the pack up. So, as I say, hopefully we can get some good overtaking into that turn one because we know this track does lend itself to that. Bit of strategy, one-stop race, who knows what might come out of that. And of course, there's always the possibility of a safety car period as well. Then a few cars going wide, few offs, so that might lend itself to an incident taking place, of course.
And as I mentioned, Lewis Hamilton, I mean, the less said the better about him because he just seems to be wanting to get out of Mercedes now. It's sad, in all fairness.
He's checked out.
Yeah,
He's checked out for all intents and purposes, Nick. He produced a great race in Las Vegas. Didn't have brilliant qualifying, as we know. Started 10th, but then showed what he can do.
yeah,
And he delivered a great performance to finish second behind George Russell. And he blew it in qualifying. Otherwise, he could have at least gone out of this great Mercedes career of his with another victory. As for tomorrow, oh, here we go again. As for
today.
today, Monday, I do apologize. This is where I'm at the moment. I'm sure you can appreciate. As for today, after qualifying, he was asked whether he still had got it because the day previously he said he was too slow. And it was
Yeah.
a one of those strange comments from Lewis again. What do you mean you're too slow? Well, he still feels now, as I say, asked after qualifying, that yes, okay, he's not got the car beneath him anymore. He's just making certain excuses and coming out with certain comments, but he's convinced he has still got it. Toto Wolff has intimated that over these past 3 years, these regulations with this car have just never given Lewis the car that he wants. Lewis likes an aggressive car to attack going into the corners, and this car requires something different. Or these cars, should I say, over these past 3 years, have required something a lot different under these regulations. Can Ferrari next season give Lewis the aggressive car that he needs to attack the corners? Only time will tell, of course, but right now, Lewis just cannot wait for these final 8 days. And unfortunately for Lewis, he's then got a load of sponsors engagement before Christmas to go through. Otherwise, there might have been the possibility of him being in a postseason Abu Dhabi test. Although, just to counteract that comment, he did say that that's not really what he wanted to do with Ferrari. And he did actually go to Fred and say, look, even if Mercedes released me from my contract early, I don't really want to do that. That's not the way I want to be seen for the first time in a Ferrari, just pootling around in a test. He wants to be, as I say, going into next season, clear Ferrari driver, doing what he can in that pre-season test in Bahrain, and then really attacking it, going hell for leather in the season opening Australian Grand Prix.
Ian, final thing before we both get a well-deserved sleep. Bold predictions for the Qatar Grand Prix. And you know what? I will go first in this one because I've had a bit of time to think about it. And as I said a few minutes ago, I think it's going to be a George Russell win, but I'm going to stick with what I said in the podcast on Monday. And I do think McLaren will win the Constructors' title on Sunday. And as an extra one, I think Haas are also going to build on what was a really positive Saturday for them. Nico Hulkenberg, as I mentioned, finishing ahead of Max Verstappen in the sprint, finishing 7th, means that Haas now have a 3-point advantage over Alpine. So my money's on Haas to add some more points to that with Kevin Magnussen starting 10th. Bring us home.
I'm just going to conclude on that point because Kevin Magnussen starts 10th. Pierre Gasly starts 11th. Pierre is not looking forward to starting directly behind Kevin Magnussen. Pierre has gone through this entire season without a single incident, without any damage. And in the pen, post-qualifying, he turned around and said that Mr. Magnussen is not very nice when it comes to overtaking. So it's a little bit of a battle that he's not really looking forward to because he wants to keep that clean sheet for this season. So that's going to be one to keep an eye on, folks, further down the grid, aside from what's going to take place at the front of it, and in particular between McLaren and Ferrari for that constructors title. I'm going to go against you, Nick. I think, given where we're at right now, I think it is just going to spill over into Abu Dhabi, but McLaren are going to have such an advantage coming out of the Qatar Grand Prix that it is going to take one almighty catastrophe in Abu Dhabi for Ferrari to overhaul them. So, as I say, I can see it going to the wire at least, but it's going to be, as I say, McLaren's really to lose going into that final race of a very long season. Right now, it feels a very long night or a very long day what I've gone through because it's now coming up to 3:20 in the morning. I appreciate folks. I've stumbled over my words on occasion in this second half of this update, but please forgive me for that. It's very, very late for me. But yeah, that's where we're at right now. It's going to go to the wire in Abu Dhabi with the constructors.
And of course, for those who are watching this video, let us know what you think. Do you think McLaren are going to win the title in the Qatar race on Sunday, or do you think it will go to Abu Dhabi? And let us know your thoughts on anything else that we've discussed, or just anything in general from Saturday in Qatar. On top of that, if you can like this video and subscribe to the channel, well, thank you very, very much. From myself and Ian, we will see you after the race on Sunday. See you later.
As always, take care, folks.